Hi everybody, I'm Jordan Beaver, head of the Fermentation Science program here at UT Tyler, and I'm really excited to share with you the first of several student-driven presentation series. The one that you are about to watch is led by one of our majors here in the chemistry department, Jim McAndrew, and in collaboration with True Vine Brewing Company here in Tyler, Jim is sharing the history and significance of several craft beer styles, the first of which are stouts and porters. So, I hope you like it.
Okay, welcome to the first episode of Beer University. Like I said, my name is Jim McAndrew. I'm actually a retired physician here in Tyler, currently a student at UT Tyler studying fermentation science. Yes, that's a real degree. Yes, we do brew beer. We make wine in class. We sample it. And currently, we're doing distillation. So we took some of the wine we made last semester, put it through a still, and made some 60% alcohol. Now, if you guys did that in your garage, you could go to the federal pen, but we get to do it in school for fun. This is the first episode. We're going to have several others to talk about different styles of beers or other alcoholic beverages. All these topics are not without controversy. So when you read from one person, you may get a story that happened. You may read another historical account that says something different. This is my best research I could do. You could go to the internet and look up everything that I'm going to tell you. But I did all the hard work, so you guys get to sit back and drink beer while I talk, which I think is a better trade-off. Our goal tonight is to learn something fun, to have fun, to learn something, so that next time you're out drinking beer with your friends, you'll have a few facts to throw out there and make it look like you know all about this beverage. Okay. Stouts and porter, the intimidating dark goodness. This is a perfect beer for a winter evening. So we'll go about this. When I was doing the research, it was interesting because I found a lot of great information on stouts and porters. Can you guys see the screen? Okay. A lot of good information on stouts and porters on sites like winemagazine.com and VinePair, which are really wine sites. And it's interesting because my brother is a real beer guy, to the point that he will have friends over and have a tasting where he'll have a 3x3 grid of different styles of beers, and he'll pair it with food. And what he's found is people who are red wine drinkers who say they don't like beer, what they're really saying is they don't like Budweiser. And he can almost always find a beer that a red wine drinker likes. My sister-in-law, she's a die-hard red wine drinker, and when she comes up to True Vine, she drinks Giant Slayer and loves it. So, where did porters come from? There was a popular beer in London in the early 1700s, which was known as the Three Threads. Now, that was probably derived from the term 3/3, because the beer was made a combination of beer, ale, and a strong beer that were mixed at the point of service. In 1722, Ralph Harwood, a London brewer, created a similar beer that didn't have to be mixed at the point of service, that was originally called Entire. So I guess they mixed the entire lot. Entire quickly became the most popular beer for working men to drink. It became popular with the porters who labored in local markets and also delivered products to pubs. So who were the porters? The story of the porters begins with the Industrial Revolution in England in the mid-18th century. Many farmers were forced off their land, leading them to start new lives in the urban areas, and populations exploded there. At the same time, there were projects to open canals and improve harbors, which had more raw materials, and they needed more workers. So the porters were a group of men working on foot, carrying the goods of merchants and traders, transporting them from the river wharf to warehouses to customers. Sometimes they had up to 350-pound loads. Sometimes it required more than one man to carry it, But this is a picture, I think, from the traditional one is at the fish market. They would be carrying huge fish or baskets full of fish from the docks to the warehouses. The porters could be hired at designated areas throughout the city. They were kind of day laborers. But portering was very hard work, exhausting work. And porters needed a considerable amount of carbohydrates of fuel, most of what they got from drinking. It was estimated that in the 18th century, workers were getting up to 2,000 calories a day just from drinking beer. Pubs were used as refueling stations and often had tables and chairs set aside just for the porters to come by, drop their load, have a pint, and then continue on their way. In fact, even in London today, you can find these areas which are called a porter's rest, where the porters would rest their goods so that they could have a glass of beer to refresh themselves.
The shelf is not for beer. The shelf is for the stuff they're carrying.
I think it could be used for either one. Yeah, there are several pictures that showed more like picnic tables like these, where they had a place for sitting and a place to put things on. But these are all over London still today. So since this is our first lecture at Beer University, it's time for a little review and some remedial work. Of course, at True Vine, there's always the cheat sheet you have to look at to figure out what's in beer. Beers are brewed with a combination of water, grains, hops, and yeast. So you can always look right up there behind you if you forget what's in your beer. So what makes beers different? Each component of the beer, the water, the grains, the hops, and even the yeast, can alter the flavor of beer. In an IPA, the hops are the star of the beer. But in porters and stouts, it's the grains that are the star. Most beers use malted barley. So here's some samples of some grains, and we have some samples on the table there. We always start with base malt, and base malt is a light malt that about 80% of the grain used in a beer is the base malt, no matter what style, because it is a grain that has a lot of carbohydrates, it's easy to access, and has enzymes to help convert the starches into sugars. The crystal malt and caramel malts are grains that have been malted and then roasted slightly, and we can go and get more and more roasting as we go from the crystal to the chocolate to the black patent malt. Yes, the patent in 1817, Daniel Wheeler patented the black patent malt. So also speaking of, pardon? So there's the lighter ones. That's the pale malt. That's there. That is a kind of a caramel or crystal malt.
Yeah, caramel or crystal malts give us body in our beer as well as color. So the base one, or the blondish one that is there, is Pilsen malt. Very boring. But very important, because it gives us all of, as Mr. Jim said, it gives us all of our starches that are then converted into sugars, and the sugars are eventually converted into beers, which is why we're here.
Yeah.
The other one is...
Right here is...
that's the crystal malt, which is a roasted one, so it's got color and body characteristics.
Yeah, it's got flavor.
And then the chocolate one is a roasted malt, and so that is going to be the darkest. You're going to get a lot of bitter, astringent. I wouldn't eat it. Good job. Extra points for the brave ones. So that's the chocolate malt, and he'll get into that here in just a second, or a roasted barley. And then the last kind of oddball are flaked oats. We'll use that in the porter that we'll be enjoying.
Now a little bit of word about malt. So you hear us say malt. Well, what is a malt? Well, it is a grain that's been allowed to partially germinate. So It's given a little bit of moisture, a little bit of warmth. It's happy. It thinks, ooh, I'm ready to sprout. And right before it sprouts, we kill it. We dry it again so it doesn't proceed, but that helps get the access to the starches so that we convert the starches into sugar and convert sugar into alcohol. So these are all malts. On the other hand, we have some grains that are not malted. They're just roasted. It's kind of a dark slide, but you can see this looks like a big coffee roaster, which kind of it is. So these are grains that are not malted. They just went straight to the roaster. And they're mainly used for flavor and color because we've kind of made it hard for the sugars to be accessed or destroyed them partially. Once we have our grains, then it all has to be milled. And this is right here where the grains are milled at True Vine. We see sacks of malt, and it goes in there and up towards the top. But the grains are milled to break open the shell to get access to those starches. That's the first procedure. So then we come to making beer. And beer could be made in smaller units or larger systems. This right here is just a home system. You can see kind of 2 or 3 tanks, just like we have big tanks over here. So it's the same procedure, it's just on a much larger scale that's done here. So first we have to mill the grain. Then we steep the grains in hot water, about 170 degrees, which helps convert the starches into sugar. Here is this big tank is a hot water tank, and the next tank over is where the grains are steeped, just like this tank right here. You can see I had a little temperature gauge on there so they can keep the temperature accurate. Then the grains are rinsed, and that's to make sure we get all the sugary goodness out, because we want every bit of sugar we can to make as much alcohol as we can. Finally, it goes over to the tank here where it is boiled. We add hops. Sometimes we add hops during the boiling, at the beginning of the boiling, the middle of the boiling, the end of the boiling, or we dry hop, which means we put it in the fermenter. We cool it down, and then we add yeast to ferment it. We cool it, carbonate, and then we drink it. So that's a little review on how we make beer. It's pretty much the same for all beers. We just change around the ingredients. So, since we're talking about stouts and porters, we have to decide what is the difference between stouts and porters. The thing to emphasize is that there are styles that describe stouts and porters, but it's very broad and interlaced. So, one brewery's stout is another brewery's porter, and there's lots of overlap. You can have very high alcohol porters and very low alcohol stouts, even though traditionally it's the other way around. So we're going to go over some general categories, but if you go to a brewery and they say, this is our porter, and you say, yeah, but it's only 4.5%, or a stout and it's only 4.5%, well, that's because that's how they decide to make it. So porters, this is the definition from the beer judging criteria. It's a substantial malty dark ale with a complex and flavorful roasty character. Here's a definition for stouts. A very dark, roasty, bitter cream ale. Kind of similar. They have a kind of similar vibe to it. And if I put 2 glasses in front of you, one with a porter and one with a stout, just by visual appearance, you may not be able to tell the difference. Porters are typically dark brown beers, and stouts are kind of black beers. Again, lots of overlap. Porters usually use a malted barley that's either roasted or kilned. So you take a malt, roast it considerably, and use that to get your color and flavor. Stouts, on the other hand, use the roasted, unmalted barley. So you take the barley before you malt it, roast it, and that's where you get your color and flavor from. Porters typically have slightly less full body. Stouts are heavier bodied. Porters typically have a lower alcohol content, and stouts have a higher alcohol content. Porters have a more of a chocolate character to them, and they're often made with chocolate malt like we were passing around, while stouts have a more roasted, bittersweet flavor or a coffee flavor. So these are really broad general characteristics because depending on the malts or the grains you use, you can shift that around considerably. Porters originated in London. One study said stouts originated from Ireland. I don't think that's really right, but it's a good story. What happened was porters were made, and they were made stronger and stronger, more alcohol, and so they were called stout porters. But then they just dropped the porter name and just called them stouts. So, but the most famous stout, as we'll see, is from Ireland, so we'll just keep that slide in there. Yeah?
So if stouts are typically stronger that they're using unmalted barley, where are they getting the extra sugars?
More grain.
Oh, okay. Okay, so just the heavier grain.
Yeah, yeah. So it's all about the amount of grain, the amount of starch, the amount of sugar. Yep. So I think Ryan is going to go get some beers to pour for everybody, because this is the tasting part. You have 2 small glasses. We're going to fill each one up, one with a porter, that's the Double Oat 7, and one with Giant Slayer. And we'll go through that a little bit. Now, in front, because we want to be a little bit scientific, when we do flavor profile studies at school, we always want to have a standard by which we go from. So that's why you have some little cups. We have a whole bunch of little more cups there and some more of the samples there, because you should have some a cherry, a dried cherry, a coffee bean, white milk chocolate, and bitter chocolate. So if you don't, Ryan will bring the beer in and we'll get that set up. No, it's just a side effect of the roasting of the malt. In fact, the coffee malt really describes its color, not necessarily what flavor profile, but it does give some some chocolate notes to the beer when you use chocolate malt. But it's really describing the color of the grain when you've done it. The heavier roasted, the more it's roasted, the bit more bitter it becomes. And that's why the roasted grain gives a more bitter flavor to the stouts. And you actually have to be kind of careful with stouts, remember, more bitter, how much hops you put in, because you're already getting some bitterness from the grain, and if you try to put too much hops in that, you can really make it a puckering bitterness. Right, and we're going to talk about that because Double Oat 7 is an oatmeal stout, and that really has a difference. In fact, if you have a friend who wants to try a porter or a stout, generally I recommend they try the porter first. It's a little bit more approachable, it's less bitter, it's creamier, it's a little bit less intense both in alcohol and in flavor, but like I said, my sister-in-law just loves Giant Slayer, so she just went straight for it. So what I'd recommend you do is take a little sip, probably of the porter first, think of the flavors you taste, and then maybe nibble on a little bit of chocolate, a little bit of well, just nibble on the chocolate and try to figure out which chocolate is closer to what you taste. Is it the milk chocolate? That's the smaller, lighter one. Or is it more the dark chocolate that you're tasting? This is interactive, so I'd like to get feedback. What do you taste? Because as you can see, this is the descriptors for the Double Oat 7, which is the porter, that there's chocolate malt in there. Now, as we'll talk about the different styles in a minute, to answer your question more fully about the oats, this is an oatmeal stout, so it has the flaked oats in it, and the flaked oats have a lot of extra stuff in there that causes some cross-linkage, which makes it smoother and silkier. So you may notice when you taste it compared to the Giant Slayer, the Giant Slayer is a little bit sharper. It's not as smooth on your palate as the porter is. Anybody determine which chocolate it tastes more like? What? Okay, Doc. Well,
I think it's dark.
Okay. This is individual, so you're all right here. Typically, it would be more the dark chocolate, but with an oatmeal stout, because it has a creamier taste to it, some people will experience more of a milk chocolateness than a bitter chocolate. One of the things, if you notice, I put "and more" because some recipes are a little bit top secret, so I can't divulge everything that Ryan puts in the double oat stout. Somebody may be a spy here.
Celebrations happen downtown. Did you help develop the beer?
Yes, the fermentation introductory to fermentation science class that I was in, we came here and helped brew that beer, and several of the classmates also submitted recipes for that beer. So yeah, it was a great fun project. There was a lot of student input into brewing that beer. Well, good, yeah. And it was kind of fun because it was a collaboration between UT, True Vine, and ETX Brewery. So it's kind of neat to see the whole community come together to produce something like that. Okay, so everybody gotten a taste of their porter. Well, now go to the stout. Now the stout, remember, has roasted barley in it. It's a higher alcohol content, 9% ABV. And if you but it really, this one really retains a lot of smoothness. It's not too bitter. There's some flavors of chocolate, dark cherry. Now there's a couple of versions of Giant Slayer that's on tap. There's not just the regular Giant Slayer, which is what I think you poured, right? But there's also a bourbon barrel aged one that comes in at 11%. And then there's another one, the maple and cacao bourbon barrel aged, that also comes in at 11%. So you can age these and come up with a very unique, even more unique beers as well. So do you taste the difference in those? A bit more bitter? Do you taste chocolate? Okay, yeah, you taste the cherry and you kind of go, yeah, I start to see a little bit of cherry in there. Who says the porter's their favorite? Okay, and who says the stout is their favorite? Interesting. Okay, so drink as you like. We'll go on with the thing. The Beer Judging Certification Program, or BJCP, has guidelines for different beers, and this is straight off their website. They emphasize that these are guidelines, not specifications, and we'll look at one of their specification sheets for one of the styles. And it's because they don't want to stifle creativity when it comes to beers. So people place their beers in the category that they think their beer is more representative, but they're suggestions, not hard limits. But the styles that they have for porters and stouts, you can see they have stouts, they have porters, English porters. They have a variety of all these. And we're going to go over what some of the flavor profiles for these beers are. So typically what you'll find as stout beers, we have the dry stout, the sweet or milk stout, oatmeal stout, foreign stout, imperial stout, and others such as an oyster stout. We're going to get to that. So, the dry stout is a black beer with dry roasted character, but the most famous of them of the Irish dry stouts is, of course, Guinness. And it's interesting because Guinness is a stout, and remember, stouts tend to have higher alcohol, but Guinness doesn't have that much alcohol in it compared to other stout beers. So that's where there's a lot of flexibility and creativity in the beers. Again, we see the bittersweet chocolate taste, coffee type flavors. And now I'm going to take a break while Ryan comes up and talks a little bit about the origin of True Vine because it relates to stouts.
Cool. Thank you, sir.
Yep.
Appreciate it. So, yeah, the book in front of you. So, let me back up just a little bit. So, I'm a creative. Any other creatives in the house? Okay, cool. Yeah. So, as a creative, you're always inspired by something, or you want to do something, or create some art. You love cooking. You might love crafting, whatever that looks like. And so that's definitely me in a nutshell. Even when I was a little dude, and so I got into it. Me and my wife Tracy. She's my best friend, and definitely a big integral part of True Vine here. Social marketing and events and all that good stuff. We got married. We started falling in love with Food Network, like way beyond when they weren't doing games and stuff all the time. They were actually cooking food. Anyways, got into cooking, loved it, loved flavor, loved wine at that time. That was kind of our thing. As I started getting into craft beer, I wanted to learn more about it. Not just learn more about it, but learn how to brew it. And so started doing some home brewing. And you see where that's gotten us. I read this book that's on screen. It's called The Search for God in Guinness. It's a biography. I'm not a reader at all. It was recommended to me from a cousin, and it truly changed my life. And it's a biography about the Guinness family, who they were, where their lineage came from, what they wanted to do in life. We're all familiar with the famous Guinness line of beer. And so it talks a lot about that in that book. But what I loved about it, what really spoke to me and really inspired True Vine is, they're making great beer there in Dublin, Ireland, and they looked around their community. Dublin, Ireland at that time was definitely a poor third world country, a lot of disease, a ton of people in a single room, low income, poverty, really pretty crappy. And they had this product that they were building, and they had their employees that they were loving on, and they saw the world around them falling apart, and they said, you know what, it's not going to be the government that's going to do it, it's not going to be a great-great-grandson that's going to do it, we're going to take it upon ourselves to see what we can do to make our community better. And so the story goes on and on and on about some very specific things that they did to truly transform Dublin, Ireland into what it is today. And so it was super impactful to me as a dude. I want to live a life of legacy, and I thought literally kind of an audible voice in my brain, which wasn't audible. Oh gosh, too many quarters, too many stouts. I literally thought if we could do a fraction of that in Tyler, Texas, or East Texas by creating a brewery and having a focus on our people and our community, then it's worth the shot. 2011 came, got an LLC, True Vine Brewing Company was born, we're brewing in my garage, and then it continued and continued. So that beer, this style of beer, is truly the starting point of True Vine Brewing Company. And that book was super inspirational. It's really cool. My wife won't allow me to read any more books. But it's great. Really proud of what they were doing, what they're still doing, and their heartbeat for their community. So cheers to Guinness. Hey, fun bonus. I might have some Guinness left over at the end of class that we can share. All right?
Oh, bonus, extra credit. How fun. So now we're going to go over some of the other styles. Sweet or milk stout. Now, early on, English brewers claimed that milk stout was healthy for you. Okay, and so milk stout is adding milk sugar in your beer, and it's like cream in your coffee. You add lactose sugar to the beer as opposed to the other sugars that the yeast can consume and convert to alcohol. So the lactose cannot be used by the yeast to make alcohol, so it just adds a sweetness and a creaminess to the beer. You get lactose from the whey, which is left over from cheese production. Lactose is made up of a combination of glucose and galactose. I put that in because my chemistry professor's here. It does use lactose sugar, so if you have lactose intolerance, you may not want to drink this style of beer. But in the mid-1940s, the English government ruled that it was misleading to call it a milk product, so they banned its use, and that's why sometimes it's called a sweet stout rather than a milk stout. In fact, in 1966, they had some food labeling things and confirmed that that they couldn't use the word milk. They could use any other word, but not milk. So that's why we call it a sweet or milk stout. An oatmeal stout, which is what you've had. It's not just for breakfast anymore. It tastes good, warmish. And I say that because I'll go back to my brother, my little brother. He's the beer snob. He likes to go on adventure bicycling rides. Camping, bicycling, ride all day, and he likes to drink beer. Well, the problem is you can't take ice on a bicycle. And where they're camping, they have no power. So he found there's certain beers that travel well while you're cycling. And he found that oatmeal stouts are one of them. So, you know, you've seen the bicycles all loaded up with panniers on the front and back, loaded down with equipment. Well, my brother does that with a little 5-liter keg of an oatmeal stout. And they stop along the way and have a little sampling. So it does taste good, warmish. It was also promoted as a tonic of good health and strength. It's usually 3 to 25% of the total grain bill when you're making it. But flaked oats are high in beta glucans, and it's that chemical that makes it more silky and creamy in your mouth. But that also causes trouble for brewers, because when you are trying to rinse all that sugar off the grains, it gets really sticky and dense, and it's hard to, you can get what's called a stuck mash, where you just can't flow water through it. So sometimes they'll add rice hulls, which are just the covering of rice, to form a better filter so that they can flush through that. It makes a better filter bed. But the reward is that you get this real silky texture to the beer. A foreign stout, it's also called an export or a tropical stout. It's like a hop beer, but a little bit more heavily hopped. It's kind of like the next step between a stout and the next one we'll talk about, which is an imperial stout. Now, if you think about going out on a muggy afternoon in the summer in Texas and think about having a beer, usually a stout is not the first thing that comes to your mind. You might want to think about a real light IPA or something like that, something refreshing. But it's interesting because these foreign stouts are brewed in a lot of tropical places like Singapore, Sri Lanka, Jamaica, and they're very popular. These are the places, of course, the British Empire went in the 1900s, and it's a very popular beer style there. And part of the reason is they think that the rich malty sweetness goes well with spicier foods, and these areas also tend to have spicier foods, so it became their go-to beers. Even Guinness had I think it was in South Africa, they had a brewery there just to supply the foreign extra stouts because it was so popular. It's usually dark brown to black in color with a full tan head. Smooth, creamy texture with a bit of alcohol warming, because it is a little bit more alcoholic than some of the drier stouts. And again, we have chocolate, coffee characteristics to it. Some even have a little bit of molasses or licorice or dried fruit notes as well. Imperial stouts. So the Giant Slayer you're drinking tonight is an imperial stout. This is an excerpt from the beer judging descriptions. intensely flavored, very strong, very dark stout with a broad range of interpretations. As I said earlier, they try not to stifle creativity and give a lot of flexibility. They have coffee, bittersweet, or dark chocolate notes, maybe some licorice. I don't think tar would be a really good flavor that I'd like to taste, but when pushed to an extreme, that's probably what you get. They sometimes have a little bit of an alcohol flavor, but it shouldn't be sharp, hot, or like kerosene, solventy. Although when you start to add the bourbon barrels aging, you do start to get a little bit more of that alcohol texture, but bourbon and stout goes really well together. So even though you get a little bit more of that alcohol flavor, it's a great combination. Color, dark red to jet black, and the flavors and go along with what we talked about with the aromas. It should have a chewy and velvety, luscious texture. And if you take those words while you sip your beer, you go, yeah, I get those. A very good one that I've tried is the Great Divide Yeti Imperial Stout. That's one of my favorites to drink. Oyster Stout. Now here we are with the oysters. So it started out in England. Beer patrons would eat oysters while they drank their beer, and they found it a nice combination for the briny oyster flavor and the rich, strong stout. So someone thought, hey, let's put oysters in the beer. And that's what they did. They started putting first the shells and then the whole oyster itself into the beer. And they found that people liked it. It added that little bit. In fact, you can even get I would say the American beer that's kind of like that. Has anybody had the Bud Light Clamato? So that has clams in it and tomato. Yeah, try the oyster stout rather than that. So one of the ways that you clear beer is you use isinglass or fish bladders. It's used to clarify the beer. It combines with some of the components and settles out. Well, oysters kind of work just as well, although it's really not used as a clarifying agent now. It's primarily just for flavor. So, yes, you can actually have oysters in your beer. What foods to pair beers with? This is not an exhaustive list, but roasted foods, smoked foods, barbecue, great beer for barbecue. Oysters, rich stews. In fact, there's even some recipes out there for a Guinness stew where you put some Guinness in there. Excellent. Chocolate or desserts, ideally where the beer is sweeter than the dish. Health benefits of beer. I'm sure this is one that you all want to know about. But my disclaimer, I am a doctor, but I'm not your doctor. So this is not medical advice. Although when I looked up this information, they had actual journal articles associated with every one of these. So the first one, beer is more nutrition than other alcoholic drinks. It's higher than wine in protein and vitamin B. It contains iron, calcium, phosphates, and even fiber. Who wants a high fiber diet? Well, if it includes beer, I'm all in. It can protect your heart. An article in the New England Journal of Medicine saw lower rates of cardiovascular disease with moderate beer intake. Now, I gave a talk to my church a couple of weeks ago about men's health, and we talked about wine. Wine is also supposed to be good for your heart. All the data on the heart stuff is a little bit soft. It's usually 1 glass a day, but people who usually quote that study to me are drinking 3 or 4 glasses a day, so I don't think that's really healthy for their heart. Beer helps prevent kidney stones. Well, I was a urologist, so I'll have to talk to this one a minute. It will actually help you pass a kidney stone in some ways because there's a diuretic effect. So drink a couple of glasses of water, drink a beer, and maybe you'll flush the stone out. There's some theoretic evidence of how it handles calcium in your body that may help but again, it's not 3 or 4 beers a day. Beer lowers bad cholesterol. Well, it has fiber in it, so maybe it could help that a little bit. Beer strengthens your bones. There is an orthosilicic acid, OSA, which may be helpful for your bones. This was in an article in the Reduce the Risk of Osteoporosis in the National Institute of Health article. Beer may help reduce stress. I'll drink to that. Researchers found that 2 glasses of beer a day can reduce work-related stress or anxiety. However, routinely turning to alcohol to help cope with stress may do more harm than good. And that was in the American Journal of Psychiatry. Beer may help improve your memory. Again, moderation there, that's for sure. And beer may help cognitive function. So those are what's listed in the literature. There are some documentation, but it all revolves around moderate drinking. So are there any questions?
Lots of stouts or porters, they have nitric oxide and crystal. What's the point of that?
The nitro.
Cabs, things like that.
Yeah, so that is nitrogen makes smaller bubbles, so it gives a creamier, silkier texture to it. So that's why if you sample the Giant Slayer regular one that is carbonated with CO2 and pushed through with CO2 versus the nitro carbonated one, you'll get a more silky mouthfeel to it.
If I understand, like for dispensing, there's a separate head for nitro, right?
I believe so. Ryan, is there a separate head for nitro that they used here? Oh, there is a quiz. Now, this is a self-graded quiz, okay? So you get to score yourself throughout the whole process. So we have several beers that we're going to describe, and you have to determine, is it a porter or is it a stout? So I'm going to give you all the different beers, and then we'll go over the answers. So just keep in mind what you're voting on here, and then we'll kind of go through them. A super smooth, soft roastiness, mocha flavors. I'm going to put them all up on the screen, let you read over them and try to think, what are the porters and which are the stouts? Everybody got their votes in? Okay. We may even have a prize for this, so Ryan went to go get some prize stuff. Okay, so the first one. Super smooth, brewed with pale 2-row crystal Munich roasted barley, flaked oats, flaked barley, chocolate malts. It was a stout. Everybody get stout for that first one?
Yes. It's the flaked barley.
Well, a lot of what you'll see. Got to speak up. Who got this one? Okay, the second one. It was a porter. Everybody get porter on that one. There's a winner right there. So what was the difference between these two? Roasted barley, okay? And is there any roasted barley in here? It was brewed with chocolate, Munich, and crystal malts. So it had all malts and no roasted barley. So that was the difference, and that was kind of one of the distinguishing things between a stout, which has roasted barley, and a porter, which has other things to make it dark.
No, that's from Founder. So both of these styles so far are like amazing. Founders is out of Grand Rapids, Michigan, and their porter is phenomenal. They also have breakfast stout that's out of bounds. Then of course Left Hand and Milk Stout is what made Left Hand.
Okay, C, notes of espresso, dark chocolate, roasty finish, brewed with pale crystals. And why is this a stout? Roasted barley. Yeah, these are non-True Vine beers. They were just examples. These are the descriptions that the brewery put on their beer. Yeah. An intense, fresh roasted Java nose with chocolate notes. It was a stout. There you go, Founder's Breakfast Stout. And why is it a stout? Roasted. Yeah. So it doesn't. This is the one I think that doesn't follow exactly where they don't say it had roasted barley, but it has some roasted malt and some black malt. So it's going to get you a pretty dark beer there. Who wants to win that one? There you go. Notes of rich chocolate, coffee, roasted finish brewed with pale Carpils, chocolate crystal, and wheat makes it a porter, right? No roasted barley there. And the last one, super smooth, the chocolate malt, coffee and toffee notes, Munich, chocolate crystal, carafe malts. Of course, that one is a porter. There you go. Okay, that's the end of the formal presentation. I think they get two beers with signing up, right? So
you got your beer coming in, you got a ticket. You didn't get your beer coming in, you got 2 tickets. You're welcome to utilize those on any of the beers, the styles that we've talked about tonight, or anything else to change directions for you. Mr. Jim, give Mr. Jim a hand.
thank you. Pardon? Yeah, I'll be doing the other classes. It's actually part of my coursework. Dr. Beaver assigned us to do some educational things related to fermentation, and we're recording this and we're going to put it out eventually. So yes, it's coursework. I'm getting graded, but yes. So we are going to do this as a series. The next one will be in March, and it will be on meads and braggots. And there may be a time that there may be a mead on tap out here. And once you make a mead, when you combine mead and a beer, you get a braggot. So, and there's all sorts of combinations we can go there. So it'll be a really fun talk as well. Hopefully we'll have some stuff you can sample. And that's the plan.
I said, that sounds great. Why don't you do it?
Be careful what you volunteer for. Thank you very much.
Well, wasn't that just a great time? Hope you guys enjoyed that. And if you did, make sure you do all the typical internet stuff to let us know. The more feedback and engagement we get, the more traction we'll have to keep offering similar presentations and events like this. And if you felt left out on the tasting or Q&A aspect of this presentation, be sure to check out truevinebrewing.com for a list of upcoming presentations as well as other awesome food, music, and events that they have coming up. So once again, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll catch you next time.